I titled this talk, Your Best Programmer is Karen from Accounting. This could be anybody, but that's kind of the uh, provocative kind of title for us to think about, which is that the best programmers in our organizations, we want them to be the domain experts who live in our organization, right? And who work on specific parts of the business that can benefit from a lot of automation and a lot of AI-driven automation potentially, right? So I don't know how many of you folks have seen this tweet that became pretty viral at the time when Karpati said that the hottest new programming language is English. Does anybody remember from how long ago this was? This was this happens to be in this was in 2023. This was a few years ago, and so Karpati's had the uh, Oracle property of being able to call things out pretty early, and so he called this out a few years ago. And since over the last, especially a lot of vibe coding improvements have happened. A lot of stuff has been happening, um, and up until 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you folks saw this, which was when um, an AI agent deleted the production code database for somebody who was building a pretty complicated application, right? So it's there is there is excitement, but there is also even for people who know what they're doing, um, this potential risk of, hey, if we screw things up, it can have serious consequences. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest challenges um, for not just developers building things, but especially for non-developers to actually build things that are business critical in production, right? Um, the goal for us is to help our non-technical people in the organization, the expertise that they have about whatever they do, right? Whether it's in finance or accounting or operations or supply chain, wherever it is, kind of want to give them the power to be able to build and ship stuff in production, right? And so we'll kind of talk about why that doesn't work and how we can try to make that work. So if you think about, um, if you kind of again think about vibe coding the way it is today, right? And being able to use either an AI assistant like Claude or ChatGPT, or using something that's kind of more that has a development environment baked in, maybe it's like Replit, Lovable Bolt, or even Cursor. And you think about you read up on what the most popular tips are, right? For vibe coding. Let's take a look at those tips that help us ship vibe coded things to production, right? So if you look at popular guides of people who've been doing this for a while and have kind of developed that tribal knowledge of, well, this is how you can make vibe coding work, right? Let's look at kind of some of those top tips and see how that stacks from somebody like Karen's point of view, who's a non-technical person. So, vibe coding isn't dumb, you're just doing it wrong. This is one of the most popular. This is a pretty popular Reddit post on the top vibe coding tips, which are pretty good actually. But the post opens up with vibe coding isn't dumb, you're just doing it wrong, which is which is probably not going to fly for non-technical people because they already have a lot of work that they do themselves in their own domain, and learning a lot of things about a new domain is pretty complicated. So this works if you're a developer who has to kind of learn the adjacent skill of prompting to help your AI code better, right? But this doesn't apply if you're not a developer. It becomes really hard to figure out what that adjacent skill of prompting is, uh, of technical developer prompting is to get it to work, right? So specifically, if you think about examples, even as simple as like the zero effort example of pick a mainstream tech stack, we've already lost Karen, right? Like it's what is the best tech stack? Like what does that even mean? Right? Um, and that's already kind of created an environment that doesn't set our non-technical people are for success, right? They can't, they don't know what a tech stack is, right? Especially for their work, right? So you think about somebody in the finance team or in the accounting team who wants to, and that's kind of one of the examples that we'll take a look at. They want to kind of automate um, approval workflows, right? So when invoices are submitted in the organization, there's a lot of custom logic depending on, what part of the world you're in, depending what kind of invoices you handle, et cetera, right? Depending on the business. Um, Depending on the latest kind of expense policy, what invoices you want to auto approve, what you want to do manually, right? So you want to kind of, let's say, automate that workflow. Now, as a part of doing this, as a part of automating this workflow, asking me to even pick a tech stack is, well, I'm lost already, right? Um, the other kind of One of the other pieces of advice for good successful vibe coding is to write a simple PRD, a product requirement document. This is really good advice. And as people kind of get into it, this is kind of almost thinking of it as more structured prompt engineering, right? So kind of like, let's do things step by step. Let's explain what we want done step by step, and then iteratively kind of improve it. So this is fair, and I think this is kind of one of those things that we can expect our users, our non-technical users, for whom we want to kind of enable in the org to kind of learn gradually, right? To start small, understand kind of, okay, this is what a requirement description looks like, and then how I kind of improve it, right? One of the third pieces of advice is use version control. That obviously doesn't track as well. That's also super hard to understand, right? I don't have to explain why, but Git is a little bit of uh, uh, an art to use for somebody who's not used it before, so it takes a little bit to wrap your head around, and it's also a lot of burden to kind of like start to use that easily in a way that is foolproof. Provide working code samples? No, that's not going to work either because I don't know how to code. So I don't have any working code samples that I can look at, right? When stuck, start a new chat with better info. This is a great vibe coding tip because sometimes you just have way too much in your context. This sort of works. It's not. I mean, we all wish that we didn't have to do this with AI, but I think at this point, almost everybody who's using AI even a little bit kind of understands that, hey, as my conversations become longer, the conversations become less reliable. So that's an expectation that's okay for a non-technical users to have, right? Um, on the security side, and this the a lot of this started to become um, much more in conversation, especially after the Replit production database incident. That these are kind of the security tips to keep in mind before you manage to ship something in production, right? And if you kind of think about, if you look at this, this is not um, this is not easy, right? Like these make no sense to again somebody who's a domain expert who just wants to get something done. It's really hard for them to say, do this, right? Like check, make sure that your code is safe from these things. It's not even, I mean, the development part was hard. The security hardening is impossible. There's no way that Karen is kind of going to go sit here and like make sure that their work is protected from like SQL injections or has the right authorization row level security policies, right? It's not going to work. Understanding server side versus client side, Jesus, right? Like, mm, it's not it's not going to work. It's not easy. It's not easy, like, just given the amount of change that is on the front end and full stack ecosystem, it's kind of hard for people to generally have a sense of server side versus client side anyway, especially now with a lot of SSR stuff. But still, um, hard to expect, right? So these kind of like vibe coding tips or advice is not really going to work, right? And so in a way, we kind of need to rethink um, how to make it possible for non-technical people to be able to ship something into production, right? And so one of the things that we've been working on PromptQL is this idea of automations, right? And and the core idea with automations is that if Karen's writing code, Karen's code is secure by design. So whatever logic or work is shipped, it is secure. Like it's not possible for it to be insecure, no matter what the user does, right? The user could do something terrible, um, could write absolutely nonsensical things, and it still would not be insecure, right? The user has a full non-dev software development lifecycle. So that means that I don't have to be technical, but I can build and test and deploy and debug and troubleshoot in production. So I can actually take responsibility and ownership of my business logic, right? I don't have to learn these concepts of version control and CI/CD and whatnot. I I'll write a piece of logic, I'll ship it. If something goes wrong, I'll find out why it's gone wrong, and then I'll go improve it. And then I think perhaps the most important piece of this is that as a user in a particular domain, let's say I'm in finance, or let's say I'm in accounting, or I'm in supply chain, or I'm a operator for a healthcare contact center, right? Whatever kind of domain expert I am, I I don't want to learn software engineering so that I can tell AI to help write software engineering better. So I don't want to learn that language. But I'd rather that the AI can understand my language, right? Like my domain terminology, my data, my the things that I care about, my business context, so that I can provide precise instructions in the language of my domain, right? I want to just use my vocabulary in, for example, how I say invoices and POs and approved vendors, right? Like I want to use these terms. I want to use these business concepts, which which in, say, for example, in software engineering might have been classes or modules or things like that, right? Like business domain objects that we might have. I want to be able to use those terms and then describe what I want done, and then I want that to work, right? As opposed to me as a user having to learn how software engineering works and then providing precise instructions to guide an AI agent to build production quality software for me, right? And so we kind of flip that equation a little bit. So that's what automations allow you to do. And we've been previewing that with some customers. We'll show you some recent updates that we've been working on. Um, and what we're going to try to do, take a look at, is take a look at this example, which is imagine kind of a scenario in your organization where lots of invoices are submitted, and you have to kind of review these invoices, right? And you have to say, um, uh, hey, is the invoice actually by an approved vendor, or is it below or above a certain amount, right? And then depending on certain criteria, it's either approved or you want to kind of flag it for a human to review, right? And this piece of logic here that you have is an example piece of logic that changes pretty frequently, that requires or has a fair bit of domain expertise and context, right? It's not like this piece of logic that is a part of a larger workflow or application can be easily is understood by a domain expert. So, for example, Karen from accounting understands what that logic for reviewing is, right? And we want them to be able to own this logic as a part of the workflow, right? And so let's take a look at what that looks like. Show you folks a quick example of what this looks like. Hey, Suraj,
Hey, folks. So nice to be here.
feel free to share your screen and take us through a quick example if you have one.
Awesome. I think I can give you a real quick heads up on how this all things are shaping up with a very early sort of demo, maybe a basic one. But I think that will kind of help you understand where this all things are going. Uh, so, so as you know, as you all might have tried, like automations is very accessible with a chat sort of interface, and then you can create a automation as simple as just asking a buddy. So in this case, maybe I can say, hey, create an automation to add two numbers
Oops, sorry, Suraj, do you want to zoom up a little bit if you can?
Oh, sorry. Is this readable enough?
Yeah. And
Awesome.
just to set context for folks who might be looking at this interface for the first time, this is a regular kind of PromptQL interface, which is a conversational interface to interact with your business's data and your business's concepts. So you can use this for analysis, you can use this for automation, which is kind of what we're showing you. But you can kind of have free-flowing conversations with everything that's inside your business and your data as an end user, as a non-technical user even, and understand kind of what is happening, ask questions, get answers, stuff like that. And the example that Suraj is showing you here is going to be an example of a small piece of logic that you like, um, that you wrote. You don't really understand the code here, but a small piece of logic that you liked that you wrote, and then you want to convert that into an automation. You want to kind of ship that logic into production. So sorry, Suraj, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So for the time using a basic version to cover the end-to-end flow. In this particular example, I have a very basic automation that basically process the data and then spits out a result, right? So when you say, hey, create an automation to do whatever, like this could be your actual database operations, or maybe even a complicated data analytics task, or maybe even like generating a weekly summary or even a dashboard as such. So once this is done, what you can do is you can simply click on hey deploy, and then put some name, number, adder, maybe I'll say one, and then deploy. So soon after you deploy, you immediately get a curl command to execute this automation. So what I mean by that is, uh, if you are a non-technical person, uh, right now this is the place where you can hand this over to somebody who want to implement or maybe like integrate this into a external tool, or even like set up something as a daily task or something, right? So you asked a question, you got an answer, and then you made an automation, like a repeated question. Think of it like a repeatedly askable sort of question, and then you verified the logic and you deployed, right? So this was all possible till last month. But the interesting part is, now that you can also see the execution logs. For that, I'll use an automation where I have a bunch of execution logs I tried in the past. uh, so to show you what is happening real quick, I'm going to execute this. It's slightly technical because this is actually, think of it like you created a daily job and then you came back next day, and then you want to see like, hey, what was my last week's summary or something, because every day it is kind of executing, right? And then what happens is you want to see like you created an automation and you're given to maybe like different sort of personas, and then they are using that automation in different systems, right? Uh, maybe maybe it is like a daily cron job, or maybe even that is a dashboard, or whatever kind of systems that you have. And then once you create that automation, you will be like curious, or maybe like if you are a chief of marketing, or maybe like if you are leading marketing in your organization, you might be curious, hey, who all are reading the weekly report, or maybe like what kind of use cases are being, or what kind of questions are being asked with this particular automation, right? So in this case, you can see like what was the question being asked, like what is the input to that automation, and then you can also see like what is the automation response. What does the automation responded to that particular ask? And then maybe in sometimes or in some cases, you might notice, okay, maybe the weekly summary can have one more logic, right?
So,
Uh,
so Suraj, if I just play that back, right? So what you're saying here is, as a non-technical person, let's say, for example, I created a simple automation that has some unique way of adding two numbers, right? That needs to be added in a very particular way. And so I create that automation. I deployed that. Some other developer has to go integrate that automation. So I don't take care of integration. I just built the logic. I deployed it. my work is done as a non-technical person. I've just tested on conversationally whether this works, right? So I shipped out, I prompted it to say, do something for me. It's already connected to my databases and understands my language, so all that is fine. I verified that, yeah, I can run some test cases, and maybe we'll see an example of that. But once I say like, hey, deploy, I'm done. I'm not looking at this anymore. Uh, that can now be integrated. That piece of logic can now be integrated into a larger application, a larger workflow. And that kind of was the screen you were showing us, the black screen you were showing us just before. But once that integration is done, that automation is actually running, right? And so again, as a non-technical person, I can come to, hey, these are the examples where the non-technical, where the kind of automation has run in the past. And so if you open up one of those execution logs, right? That's kind of an example of the automation that has run. So here I can see that, is this like a divider example? Okay, cool. Like maybe it's a divider example. And so I can see that it's taking, it's like taking it's taking some input and it's giving me an output. And now if I as the owner of this logic, right, feel uncomfortable about something and I'm like, hey, this is wrong, um, that's when I can kind of go in and say I can start to edit and update that automation. Is that's the experience here for the non-technical person. Do you want to show an example of like maybe just say that, hey, if it's a negative number, just always return a zero. Maybe that's like my very custom logic that in case the input is negative, right? Like we're just always going to return zero.
Exactly. So in this case, I just made it a little, interesting because there is an AI part involved. So you ask with number one and number two, it just simply gets added, and then it also come up with a fun fact with that response, whatever the
Okay.
result is. So yeah, just wanted to show that there's AI capabilities as well. Now let's come to the part where you mentioned, like, which is important for non-technical users to just understand, or maybe even like add conditions, right? Exactly like you said. So let's try, hey, now if there is a negative number in the input, make it make the result always return zero. That's it. Like you hit enter, you suddenly is taken to the chat interface, like with all familiar user interface, and then PromptQL will start its work, like basically like trying to understand what you mean, trying to understand what does automation, what that specific automation means, and then also try to understand like what was the initial input for that particular iteration, and then also it kind of modifies that logic. So let's see what this time it does. See, it has already like added a condition here. Whenever whenever at least one input is like negative, then we'll simply return zero. This is a slightly technical thing, but this is just to give you enough visibility and confidence on what is happening. But as a non-technical user, you can always like, hey, test this with more inputs. So you just talk to PromptQL just like you're talking to a engineer or something, and then it just try to understand what you mean, and then give some make some additional test cases, and then try it. See, it's actually created like six test cases, and then made sure that the response is coming up nicely. And if you notice, the input is not only like negative, it is a mixed one, because the idea, because it kind of understood like the idea of you reprompting, hey, try with more tests, is because you want more confidence, right? So in that case, it just generated decent enough test cases to verify that logic works. And again, like when you want to put this back to your deployment, you can always do this, and then maybe use the same name to swap on the exact same thing. So what happens is you put it back, and then it says, hey, what has changed? If the logic has changed, or is it only the internal logic, or maybe like if there is any shape changes or something. What I mean by shape is like the contract between your automation with any other system that are already like connected. So in this case, let's try just deploying it, and then let's try this executing this once again. Oh, I should have put a negative number. See, the response is 0. So basically you did not touch the code at all. You just looked at the execution logs, and then you figured out there is something wrong, and or maybe like you figured out, okay, there is a condition that can work out well, and then you just you just gave a English instructions to the PromptQL. It worked out well. You tested, you gained enough confidence, you deployed. That's the end-to-end workflow. So basically,
Awesome.
there's yeah,
No,
yes,
that makes a lot of sense. I'll we can take some questions as and when they come up, but thanks a lot, Suraj, for the demo, and I'll help me continue and stitch that together with um, what the end-to-end stack looks like. But do hang around in case there are some questions, and otherwise I'll just take over screen share and help wrap that up. Thanks a lot, Suraj.
absolutely. Thanks.
Awesome. And
Bye, folks.
so kind of just like Suraj was saying, right? The important piece of what he was demoing was that if that as a non-technical user, I'm able to kind of prompt, write code, write business logic that interacts with at purely a logical layer, right? Which is a simple computational example, like the right way to add integers and whatnot, right? But also that entire layer is connected to the core data layer as well, including um, core transactions that already exist, right? Which could be um, actual financial data, which could be user data, etc. Right? And and one of the kind of important pieces about the way that the stack is set up is that as a non-technical user, they can the idea is to allow domain experts to write, test, debug, and own their logic or their bits of the application in a way that is completely decoupled from what is happening at the core data layer, right? So, in the way that PromptQL is architected, its data layer goes through um, what some of you may know as what we call DDN, is a federated query engine with an authorization policy engine that provides an API to kind of the PromptQL layer. And that's the layer that has all of the data modeling and all of the authorization rules, including kind of, for example, protection against things like rate limiting, etc. So all of the security concerns are taken care of at that core kind of data and transactional layer, right? So if you were thinking for it as a banking application, you have your account models, you have your transaction models, you have a transaction method, right, which does a credit and a debit. Now those are kind of set up here securely, and APIs are exposed, and the APIs that are exposed work entirely in user space, right? So the APIs do not work in system space. So that means that after prompting, when a certain piece of logic is created or a certain application component is created, right, that piece can only ever work in the context of the end user, right? So it's almost in the way that you think about front end code and back end code. All code, even though it's technically executing on a server or whatever it is all technically front end code, right? So this logic of whether it's approving an invoice or whether it's summing two integers or whether it's helping schedule an appointment for a patient or whatever it is, those are all kind of pieces of code that run in the security context of the end user, right? Which means that like the escalation that can happen, the mistake that can happen is only in the context of a single user as opposed to being in the context of the entire system, which can massively screw things up, right? And then of course it also means that a bunch of guarantees around security and infrastructure are already kind of baked in and not something that a non-technical user can interfere with either deliberately um, or by mistake. And just to kind of help visualize this for you, right? And for example, if I have a large billing kind of database or system, right? Um, it, it- I might have lots of different entities in the system, right? And these different entities will have, of course, like that particular data model, they'll have fine-grained permissions, right? That talk about like who can access them. So there's an admin, we can have a user can only access it if user can only access something if uh, let's say, for example, in an invoice system, if it belongs to me, if I'm the user ID, right? Only that's when I can read the invoice, stuff like that. So you might have pretty complicated permission rules for different models in your system. Um, and and once that is set up, that is kind of what is exposing that API to the PromptQL layer, where these kind of quote unquote vibe coded programs are written, right? The kind of core bit in the approach here is that for a non-technical user, they don't have to think about an SDLC. They just write pieces of logic and ship them. They view previous running instances of that run logic, and then they can go update them as they want to, right? That's all that they think about. For them, it's very first principles. The universe is not more complicated than that. The universe is their logic, their test cases, is past runs of that logic so that they can update that or not, right? And this logic in our case was doing something that was on the back end, but this logic could also be generating a UI component, right? It could be generating a visualization. It could actually be generating a UI component like a small form. It doesn't kind of matter what that piece of code does. But the idea and the philosophy here, kind of what we've been working on with our customers, is to look at a large pipeline, a software pipeline of an application or a workflow, and to carve out safe holes inside that SDLC, right? So you kind of carve out a hole that's safe, right? And that is the piece that the domain expert can now actually own end to end, right? Of course, the underlying AI has to be set up with enough context and enough training to understand the domain, right? But once that, but if the underlying AI model can understand the domain well, can understand the business context well, is securely connected to data, then a safe hole is kind of carved out in that SDLC, and that kind of then allows us to give full end-to-end control to the domain expert, right? Where they can take responsibility for writing good code or writing good logic, writing bad logic, fixing bad logic, even to the degree of where if you write bad logic that screws something up on the behalf of the user, you can actually go back for that user and go fix things too, right? Because you own the entire system. Your AI is connected to that data securely, right? Um, Obviously, you can have like several different examples of the same thing, right? You can have, for example, software that's pretty common in a contact center where you have an operator. Somebody calls the operator and says, "Hey, I need to schedule I need to schedule an appointment." You kind of enter lots of different types of data about the patient, right, as an operator, and then typically the operator then has kind of a manual that they look at or think about. Maybe it's partially assisted by software to help them determine the best appointment slot. There's a lot of variation that's possible, right? Sometimes clinics are shut. Um, Sometimes on particular days, depending on the particular region that you're in, some clinics don't allow certain kind of insurance vendor or provider, right? And that kind of tribal knowledge is in my head as an operator that I have to use, and then I have to kind of select the right appointment slot. Now, this piece in the middle is a safe hole that can be carved out that can now just be owned by an administrator who understands the domain well. And that domain expert can just author this business logic of how an appointment slot is selected, right? What's allowed, what's not allowed, entirely um, by them, like entirely on their own. And for the operator, the experience just gets simplified. They talk to the patient, they click on a button, an appointment slot gets suggested, they eyeball it and they approve it, right? And this saves a lot of time, a lot of like error proneness, and a lot of training also, because you don't have to maintain this kind of manual for an operator to do something. right? So this kind of one example, but you can apply this for everything. You can apply this for an example where you have tax filing that you need to do. You need to file taxes every month. You're on the HR side. You want to compute people's PTO to create the right amount that should be there for their compensation for the month. You can use this for example, if you have sales calls that happen and you automatically kind of want to extract the right properties from that sales call according to your sales playbook and then update your CRM, right? Like, so who are the champions? Who are the people who are not convinced? Who's the economic buyer? Who owns the budget? What is the budget line item? You might have a playbook that requires you to capture these things according to certain criteria. And that logic might continuously change. So now an expert, a person who's a part of the sales team, who's a domain expert, can just write that logic, um, and that hole that determines this extraction can be filled, right? The rest of the SDLC pipeline does not have to be changed. That just continues to work, right? That integration and that security is not something that they have to think about. So that's a quick look at what automations look like. If you want access, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll hook you up with a demo that's relevant to kind of your data.